Major funding for this program was provided by a grant from Broward County and the Seminole Tribe of Florida.
Every time I work on a canoe, because of the chipping noise, I always have some woodpeckers come around. And I always referred it to them as the original wood carvers. So I have a great deal of respect for them because I also am a member of the bird clan. What the Creator mentioned to us when he came and gave us how to live and take care of the land, one of the things that he said about the fire was, in my language, the Miccosukee language, is that ito tachal in hinchlin umgai nagi simha holia ataslachik shilhugnachik chabachik alhachamachkito aglaliwa luktahin chalen ito tachal in hinchligai yoli chamachkito and achapotiche achataslachamachkito and that translates to one of the laws of nature. The fire signifies that we're still holding on to the beliefs, to the instructions of taking care of the land. And when he sees the fire, as he looks down, it signifies to him that we're still doing what was instructed to us. So that's why the fire is valuable to me. And I need to have one of the elements. I can't function without the four elements. So I think it's firing up now, so it's coming along pretty good.
What's interesting is when the Spanish arrived here, they saw the people of South Florida as being very primitive, heathens, of course, in their minds, primitive because they didn't have agriculture. And most tribes in North America, even at that time, had agriculture, including corn agriculture, but not South Florida. And so therefore they saw the South Florida people in a very low way, but not understanding that the maritime resources were so plentiful that even though agriculture was available, was accessible, they had no reason to adapt it because there was enough with the sea turtles and with the fishing and the shellfish. It just was not an important resource to have to exploit. And only in South Florida, as well as in the Pacific Northwest, did indigenous people reach a level of social complexity in art without agriculture, based totally on the marine economy. The sea turtle shell was actually excavated from inside the Miami Circle. It was near the center of the circle, and it was aligned east-west like the other animal burials. And it shows the importance of these animals to the Tequesta, the fact that they were deliberately interring them, probably as a ceremonial offering of some sort. Well, Tequesta is the name of the tribe associated with southeast Florida, particularly with the mouth of the Miami River, and that name comes from a visit of Ponce de Leon in 1513 to Biscayne Bay. Now, we don't know precisely what was said or what occurred because the logbook has disappeared, but the maps that occurred directly after his visit and mentioned by the Spanish historian Herrera indicate that the name of the place name and the tribal name at the mouth of the Miami River was called Tequesta with a C. And they are obviously, it's the phonetic spelling of what they heard as being the name of that group. And that eventually became Tequesta with a T.
The canoes were the main transportation like anywhere else in the world. If there's men, tools, log, and water, you're gonna have a canoe. If you look on the state of Florida, you will see there's a lot of rivers, canals. Now they're all a lot of man-made stuff, but back then there were channels that connected to each other. And the way to travel that was through a canoe. Actually, around 1929, the highway between Naples and Miami was completed, and that disrupted the natural flow of the river of grass. And that was kind of the sign of the beginning of the end for the canoes. These canoes have been around. The oldest one that's been carbon dated thus far is 11,000 years old, and it resides in Brighton Reservation. Back then, we weren't known as Senecas, Navajos, or any other tribe. I think we were just referred to each other as the people. Towards the end of our canoe carving era, they were up to 30 foot. That's because there were trees of that significant size. And if you could get a 30 foot out of that log was, the tree was huge. In the 1940s, they cut the huge cypress in Louisiana, and they made their way down here to what is known as Big Cypress National Forest. Built the train tracks that came all the way down to Ochapi, which means field, cornfield. It doesn't specify what, but Ochapi is field. So they made the train track to Ochapi. The trees were huge. They were 25 feet in circumference. They were huge, huge. 150 feet tall, 500 years old plus. So it was kind of like a lost art, and I just decided that I should be doing something. So I got back into my reenactment and started carving canoes. You know, when I was working on the canoe, I always thought the high end was the front and the low end was the back. I was talking to my mom one day. I was showing it to her, and she was holding it like this, where the higher end's here and the lower end's back here. And she was telling me Grandpa was here, Grandma was up front, and the three sisters, the daughters, were in the middle and going this way. And I thought, Mom, it's supposed to go that way, but I didn't say anything. So, and I'm glad I didn't, because later on, as time went by, I found out that both sides were front and back. This side, the higher end, would be the front. If you were in any areas that was vegetated, maybe sawgrass, lily pads, cattails, what have you. And this side, the lower end, would be more suitable for calm waters, so that this side will work as a valve for you to easily control. And if you got stuck somewhere, you know, you didn't have to turn the canoe around. You just turned yourself around and you could pull yourself out of there. I like being out here in the quietness and the still, and to be around other animals, to have the sun on me, to feel the breeze coming through, to have the fire going. And for a while, I had water here, so I had all four elements surrounding me at one time. And there's still water right in there, but it's not as much as it used to be. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think I'm doing a good job. So, I'll just keep on chipping away, one chip at a time. Have you guys ever seen New York City out in Big Cypress Indian Reservation? Well, here it is, right here. New York City, out in Big Cypress Seminole Indian Reservation.
Oh yeah, you can see how it was actually a long island.
Oh yeah, right here.
Mm-hmm. That's funny that it goes east to west. Well, I mean, especially down here, I mean, there's only certain trees that are going to be able to make canoes from, and you find that in the prehistoric canoes too, that there's cypress, quite a few cypress canoes that are in that archaeological record. So it's knowledge that's been accumulated over generations. Skills and arts and trades, literally a direct line to your teacher and their teacher and their teacher. Yeah, I mean, people that remake some of these old tools, they say they're actually pretty sturdy. Did you ever see any of these when you were younger? Those cone points for the arrows? I've never really viewed the knowledge as something that belongs to me as an individual. It's just something that I carry for a time before I pass it to somebody else to carry that knowledge with them as well.
Hey, it's been a while.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good to see you. Apiaca had one of his villages at what is present-day Long Key.
Yeah.
And in the 19th century maps, they called it Sam Jones's Seven Islands. And there's a wonderful map from 1897 where you can see each of the islands, and it actually has a village depicted as well as a boat landing.
Yeah.
Which, so that's on display there at the museum. That was one of the last holdouts of the Seminoles in Miccosukee during the Seminole War, and it was the attack by, I'm not sure I remember the military man, was it Captain Bankhead? I'm not sure who it was, but he came using the South Fork of the New River to surprise the Apiaca, who fighting as they allowed their children and the women to retreat, fought a rear-end action against the soldiers.
People are surprised, our knowledge of this land, because a lot of people tend to think Seminoles kind of just showed up to Florida late in the game, but the amount of local knowledge we had definitely, I think, shows a longer connection to this place than many people think.
I think so, too, and you know better than anyone that there's a lot of misconceptions about what Seminole life was like. Everybody assumed that they were only always living in the Everglades. That was not true, because in the beginning they were on the Atlantic coastal ridge, and it was only because of the Seminole Wars that they were pushed deeper away from the coast. I know you're now the master of making the dugout canoe, and I know you've got a toolkit, but I thought you'd be curious to see what the pre-contact, the prehistoric Tequesta and the Calusa, what they were using for making the canoes.
Yeah.
So this is just a replica model, and it's taking a shell with a adze-like blade. And the idea was you would be chipping away what would be the charred wood from the log, creating the canoe. Now, I have no idea how long it would take for someone to make a canoe using a shell tool, but this is an example of what they actually were using. So this This particular one is broken. You can see it was intensely used until it was broken. You can see it's got a notch on one side in the hole.
Yeah.
And you feel the weight of that.
Yeah.
You know, there's no Home Depot back then, so they had to make their tools from what was available. But what a lot of people don't know is that they didn't have hard stone in South Florida.
All of us are kind of intrigued to see how long would it take us to
Exactly.
make one with pre-steel technology, at least pre-steel here.
This is another typical tool. This is an axe, again, and you can see it's from the lip of a conch shell. The blade is broken because it was used.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty heavy. It'd be very difficult to find a shell today that size because they're very diminished in size and they're very rare. But here's the blade. You can actually see the edge, and you can see why it works so well as a woodworking tool.
Yeah.
Probably dating from 1 to 2,000 years old.
I wonder if this was almost an adze.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Because the bevels
That's exactly right.
to one side.
So the woodworking tool, as you know, as an adze, is that they're cutting towards them and shaving the wood.
So and these come from like, is that queen conch specifically?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know if I've seen one.
So thick, huh?
Well, it's very long as well. That's really, really neat, because then it would have been a little bit,
Yeah.
just a little bit longer. Yeah, and I always tell people, it's like, I think we did quite a bit of carving and not just the burning and scraping, because across North America, there's probably millions of carving tools that have been found in the archaeological record.
Yeah.
And so I don't think they were for decoration.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, because I've heard of stone axes upwards of like 40 pounds, and that's definitely not an axe you'd swing sideways. That's one you'd lift and drop, like, and say, like a canoe.
You know, they say it takes the right tool to do the job. And I agree. However, in carving, it's not just the right tool. Because if the right tool is not sharp, it'll bounce right off. You know, these guys, you can't find them in Ace Hardware store. I have to go to antique stores, so I find myself pulling over nowadays on 75, 95, interstates, turnpikes, because I'm looking for these guys, the tools of the past. You know, they're kind of forgotten about, but us in the carving world, these are invaluable like they once were.
The dugout canoe is a very important artifact for indigenous people because this is the one artifact that bridges centuries, in fact millennia of time in Florida for indigenous people. It is the important artifact that connects the coast to the interior. This is the way of transportation that was principal for all indigenous people. And if you want to understand that, you just think of the Miami River or you think of the New River in terms of those were the I-95s of its time. This is how you got from the Atlantic Ocean to the Everglades. It was just critical. And of course, part of having a canoe is having the paddle. And the paddle is also made out of wood. The trees generally were made out of, the trees used were generally cypress trees, sometimes pine trees in North Florida, but they were carefully carved out with a long process as part of creating the canoe. This particular paddle was actually found in an Everglades tree island, and it's been burnt, and it's probably one reason that it was so well preserved. So the most important part of the prehistoric toolkit are shell tools, and that's because these were something hard enough that you could actually use for manufacturing. What's unusual here is this cut piece of the shell that's missing, and that missing piece is actually this. This is a celt, or an axe made out of shell, and this is a woodworking tool. Very important in terms of making canoes and also making houses and structures. And in this particular one, you can see there's actually grooves for tying this onto a wooden handle. And of particular interest is the fact they could actually make a knife out of a shell. This is a Cassius shell, and this is actually being sharpened into a blade-like scraping or cutting tool. And finally, the most important of the woodworking tools is the Buzicon adze, and you can see that this has a chisel-like beveled edge. These holes, perforations, are for tying it onto a wooden handle. And you could go to the canoe. This is what was used. It was actually cutting or shaving the wood using a wooden handle going through these perforations. That's how the handle was attached to the wood. I think what I find fascinating about the dugout canoe is that not only is it the predecessor for the modern canoe, but the canoe has been around for such a long time.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, intriguing that, dugouts have persisted through today, continuous and unbroken in their use in making, just changing in tools and technology over the years, but still a dugout.
And that is the one aspect of culture, of indigenous culture, that is similar through thousands of years. And not just, of course, in South Florida, but all over the eastern United States. That was just the way of getting around. I used to tell people that for prehistoric people, if you couldn't get there by canoe, you didn't go. They had walking trails, but the water trails were really an important part of their world. And the idea of connecting, in particular, like Biscayne Bay with the Everglades and the New River with the Everglades, all of those were the major arteries going into the Everglades, and the only way to get there in a practical sense was by canoe.
Oh yeah, definitely. The waterways were the highways of Florida before modern pavement.
Fort Lauderdale today as a large, thriving, growing city with construction going on all around us. That was not the case, obviously. It was not the case 100 years ago, never mind 200, 300, 2,000 years ago when the Tequesta were here. But our understanding and of the Everglades and of all of the waterways that we see and use today to our greatest benefit really does stem from the Seminole tribe and the Tequesta and the legacy that they inherited from the original indigenous tribes down here. The interconnectivity of all of these waterways, including the New River, was a connection for all of the various trading posts that were around this area, including Stranahan here in Fort Lauderdale, the Smallwood in Chokoloskee, and the Stoddard as well. These connections have been going on for thousands of years between the Seminole and our pioneers, between the Tequesta and the Spaniards, between the Spaniards and the Seminoles. It has been going on as long as Fort Lauderdale has been inhabited. We have what we call the Stranahan Collection, and obviously it is because of Ivy Stranahan. So when Frank Stranahan first started operating his trading post and we first started operating the ferry, he was living along the New River. He had his closest neighbor was John Jumper, and John Jumper was a Seminole man. He was living in what is today Coley Hammock, and the Seminole started coming down the New River, and they stayed overnight on his land, and the relationship was harmonious at the beginning and throughout his life. They realized that they needed each other. It was a good place to start trading. It was a good place to bring their furs, their skins, especially alligator skins. So these various trading posts, they functioned as access points and portals into the indigenous culture.
My grandpa, he's always referring to if you have a little parcel of land, you have to take care of it, regardless what size it is. In this case, it's a place where I'm working on my canoe. All the things that I can't buy at Walmart are right here within my vicinity of ear, sight, and listening. So that's all I need. All I need is to be out here, to be in nature, to be with one of where I came from.
The fact is the principal tribe during the contact period was the Tequesta, and their site, the largest site, was at the mouth of the river. There's many sites, hundreds of sites all through Miami-Dade County, all through Broward County, through the Florida Keys, and it's a matter of wherever there's a great location of uplands near the water, near the ocean, these were places that attracted people to live just as it does today. And these sites extend all the way into the interior, into what's now Everglades National Park. And there were trails that went through parts of the Everglades, as well as the rivers and creeks. But to understand these sites, you have to look at them as this mosaic of activities and things, just like we do in our world today, that we're all connected by highways. But during prehistoric times in Miami, the Miami River was the I-95 of its time. But the water access was critical.
All I am is one grain of sand. That's all I am. And all my ancestors before me were also a grain of sand that helped to form what I walk on today, what I call earth, where the air comes from, where the fire comes from. All of this is part of not only my ancestors, but the human race. We all came from somewhere. We're all from one tribe. We all are created by the Creator, who has the last say-so.
Major funding for this program was provided by a grant from Broward County and the Seminole Tribe of Florida.